It required merely 6 minutes of substantive discourse for JD Vance to compel Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to confront the harsh realization that performative social media retorts are utterly ineffective when one's opponent possesses a genuine command of economic principles, has personally endured the crushing poverty she merely romanticizes, and arrives fully armed with a comprehensive dossier of her complete voting record. The NBC special event had been aggressively promoted for weeks across multiple platforms as a definitive confrontation titled America's Economic Future, a debate that the network executives were desperately hoping would generate fireworks, produce viral moments, and perhaps spark some heated exchanges that would dominate the social media landscape for days to come. However, what they ultimately received was something far more devastating and consequential: a systematic dismantling of progressive performance politics executed by an individual who had actually lived through the struggle, earned his credentials through merit, and accomplished tangible results in the real world. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked onto the stage, radiating the confidence of a politician who had spent 6 years being protected by a sympathetic media ecosystem, celebrated by progressive activists as a generational icon, and insulated from serious intellectual challenge by the reinforcing echo chamber of her massive social media following. She had her talking points meticulously prepared, focusing on familiar themes of inequality, systemic injustice, the unchecked power of billionaires, and the plight of the working class. She had practiced her passionate delivery in front of mirrors, prepared her emotional appeals to resonate with her base, and operated under the assumption that her massive social media following somehow translated directly into intellectual credibility and policy expertise. J.D. Vance walked onto the stage appearing exactly as he was, a Yale Law graduate, a best-selling author of a memoir that defined a region, a Marine veteran who had served his country, and the Vice President of the United States who had grown up in actual, grinding poverty and escaped it through merit, determination, and education, rather than through performance or connections. He carried nothing but a simple leather folder containing his notes and evidence, and he wore that slight, knowing smile of someone who is fully aware that they have already won the debate before it has even begun, because they have done their homework extensively, while their opponent has relied on charisma and slogans. The moderator, Lester Holt, looked cautiously optimistic as he surveyed the scene, harboring a hope that maybe this encounter would be civil, maybe it would be substantive, maybe both sides would make valid points, and ultimately, America would benefit from a thoughtful discourse on its economic future. However, he was wrong on all counts, as the night would unfold very differently. AOC was given the first opportunity to deliver her opening statement, and it was polished, passionate, and entirely predictable, hitting every note her supporters expected as she talked about growing up in a working-class family, about her time working as a bartender, and about her commitment to fighting for everyday Americans against corporate greed and billionaire excess. It was a good speech in terms of performance, a speech she had given versions of hundreds of times at rallies and on cable news. And the progressive audience members in the hall applauded enthusiastically, feeling their champion had started strong. Then Vance spoke, and the tone of the evening shifted instantly. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," he began, his voice calm but authoritative, "thank you for that moving opening statement. It was very passionate, very emotional, and clearly well rehearsed. But here's the thing," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "and I say this as someone who actually grew up in poverty, not the kind you perform on Instagram from your luxury apartment in a gentrified neighborhood. Passion doesn't replace policy, emotion doesn't substitute for economics, and having millions of Twitter followers doesn't mean you understand how to actually help poor people rise out of their circumstances." He opened his leather folder deliberately. "I grew up in Middletown, Ohio, and Jackson, Kentucky. in the heart of the Rust Belt and Appalachia. My mom was addicted to drugs, a struggle that defined my childhood. I lived with my grandparents because my home life was unstable. We were poor. Not, my dad was an architect in Westchester County poor, but actually visibly poor. I joined the Marines to escape that life and serve my country, he said, listing his path. I went to Ohio State on the GI Bill, then earned my way into Yale Law School. I wrote a book about that experience, Hillbilly Elegy, that helped millions of people understand the struggles of the working class. Then I went into business, became a venture capitalist, invested in companies, created jobs, got elected to the Senate, and now I serve as Vice President. Vance looked at her directly, his gaze unwavering. You got a degree in economics from Boston University, bartended for 8 years, won an election by defeating a corrupt incumbent in a low-turnout primary, and then spent 6 years proposing impossible policies, killing jobs in your own district, and building a personal social media brand. So let's discuss what actually helps poor people versus what makes you popular on Instagram, he challenged. Because I've lived both poverty and success, whereas you've performed poverty while living in luxury, and there is a profound difference between those two realities. The room went completely silent. AOC's smile had frozen on her face. The progressive audience members stopped their applause, and Lester Holt realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to be the polite civil discourse he had hoped for, but rather a brutal exposure of political realities. What happened next wasn't a debate in the traditional sense. It was a masterclass in how someone who actually escaped poverty through education and hard work systematically dismantles someone who tweets about poverty from a $3,000 designer outfit while actively killing jobs in her own district. Vance didn't waste time with pleasantries or political jargon. After his opening salvo, he flipped open his folder to the first tabbed section and launched into what could only be described as a rigorous cross-examination of her entire career. Congresswoman, he began, looking at his notes, you graduated from Boston University in 2011 with a degree in economics and international relations, which are impressive credentials on paper. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you actually used that economics degree? He paused for effect. And I don't mean used it to tweet about billionaires or propose trillion-dollar fantasies. I mean, when did you last actually apply rigorous economic principles to policy analysis? AOC straightened in her chair. Defensive. I use my economics education every day when she started. But Vance interrupted gently but firmly. Really? Because after you graduated in 2011, you didn't work as an economist. You didn't work as a financial analyst. You didn't work in any economics-related field. You bartended and waited tables, which is honest work that I respect. But it's not economics. So you had an economics degree that you didn't use professionally for 8 years, he continued, building his case. Then you got elected to Congress in 2018, and suddenly you're proposing multi-trillion-dollar economic plans that would restructure the entire American economy. He pulled out a specific document. Let's look at what actual economists, people who've spent their careers studying economics, think of your proposals. Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize winner and a liberal economist who is generally sympathetic to progressive causes, called your Green New Deal not realistic. Larry Summers, Treasury Secretary under Clinton and an advisor to Obama, said your economic proposals are not serious policy. Even liberal economists who agree with your goals say your understanding of economics is fundamentally flawed. Vance leaned back, contrasting her record with his own. Now, I went to Yale Law School. I studied under serious legal scholars. I clerked for a federal judge. I practiced law at a major firm. I used my education in my career before running for office. When I write about economics in my book, or my legislative proposals, I cite actual data, actual studies, actual economic research. When you propose economic policy, he said, pointing at the document. Economists across the political spectrum reject it. Why? Because you have a degree you never used professionally and clearly do not understand. He pulled out more documents, piling up the evidence. Let's be specific. Your Green New Deal, and we'll get to the full disaster of that later, would cost between $51 and $93 trillion, depending on the analysis. That is more than double all federal revenue over 10 years. Did your economics degree not cover basic arithmetic? He asked, his voice calm but devastating. Did they not teach you that you can't spend $93 trillion when you only have $45 trillion in revenue? You graduated from Boston University with an economics degree, Vance summarized. Then you ignored everything that degree should have taught you. You proposed policies that violate basic economic principles. You killed jobs in your own district because you don't understand how tax incentives work. You've become the poster child for credentialism without competence, having a degree, but not understanding what it means or how to apply it. AOC tried to respond, her voice rising. I worked as a bartender because I come from a working-class background, and I understand the struggles of— Stop! Vance held up his hand, cutting her off. I come from Appalachia. My mom was literally a drug addict. I lived with my grandparents in a house that barely qualified as habitable. We were poor, actually poor. Not my dad was an architect in Westchester poor. You had parents who could afford to send you to Boston University, he reminded her. That's not working class. That's middle class. I joined the Marines to escape poverty because I had no other options. We both got educated, but I actually used my education before claiming to be an expert. He pulled out her Green New Deal resolution again. You took an economics degree and then proposed this. A plan that would cost more than World War II, that includes economic security for those unwilling to work, that would require retrofitting every building in America in 10 years. That's not using your education, Congresswoman. That's ignoring everything your education should have taught you about scarcity, trade-offs, and basic math. Vance looked at the camera, addressing the viewers directly. The difference between us is simple. I got an elite education and used it to understand problems and propose solutions. She got an elite education and ignored it to propose fantasies. I used my education to escape poverty and help others understand how to do the same. She uses her education as a credential while proposing policies that economists say would hurt the poor. Credentials without competence is just expensive ignorance with a diploma. That was round one. Vance dismantles her credentials. Share if you're tired of fake expertise. Vance flipped to the next section in his folder, pulling out a series of large, high-resolution photographs that made the audience gasp audibly. They were photos from the 2021 Met Gala, showing AOC in an elegant white gown with bold red letters on the back, spelling out, "Tax the Rich." Let's talk about September 13th. 2021, Vance began, holding up the image. The Met Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. One of the most exclusive, expensive, elite events in America. Tickets cost $35,000. That is the median American household income for an entire year. Congresswoman, he said, his tone sharpening. Let's discuss the irony, or more accurately, the hypocrisy of wearing a designer gown that says, "Tax the rich," to a party that costs what most Americans make in a year to attend. He spread the photos out on the table. You attended this event wearing a custom Aurora James gown. When questioned about it, you said the ticket was borrowed or comped, meaning you got it for free because of your celebrity status. But the dress was custom-made for you. Who paid for that? The designer? Aurora James, who you're promoting? Let's talk about Aurora James, Vance said, pulling out tax documents. Aurora James, the designer who made your Tax the Rich dress, owed over $100,000 in back taxes and unpaid wages to her workers. So you wore a tax the rich dress, made by someone who didn't pay their taxes or their workers. The irony is so thick, you could cut it with a knife. He showed more photos from the event. Here you are posing with celebrities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Here you are laughing and enjoying an event where tables cost $200,000 to $300,000. All while your Twitter feed was full of posts about inequality and the suffering of working people. You spent an evening with the ultra-wealthy elite at an event your constituents couldn't dream of affording, and you called it making a statement. Vance pulled out a financial analysis sheet. The median household income in America is approximately $35,000. That's what one ticket to this party cost. You spent an evening at a party that costs what a working family lives on for a year, wearing a custom designer dress, socializing with billionaires and celebrities, and you called it class solidarity. That's not solidarity, Vance declared. That's participating in elite culture while wearing a slogan. He then transitioned to her current living situation, showing photos of her luxury apartment from her own social media accounts. You live in a luxury apartment building in D.C. that costs $2,800 per month. Your building has a rooftop pool, concierge service, high-end finishes. The median rent in your district in Queens is about $1,800 for family housing. You pay more for your solo luxury apartment than your constituents pay to house their entire families. Vance's voice got harder, more accusatory. You wear designer clothes worth thousands of dollars. You've been photographed in custom suits, designer accessories, expensive glasses. Fashion blogs track your wardrobe because it's expensive enough to be newsworthy. You dine at expensive restaurants in D.C. You travel first class. You live a luxury lifestyle that your constituents can't afford. And then you lecture them about inequality. He looked directly at her, contrasting their lives again. I grew up sharing a bedroom with my sister in my grandparents' house. We didn't have a rooftop pool. We didn't have a concierge. We didn't go to parties that cost $35,000. When I made money from my book, he continued, I lived modestly because I remember what it's like to have nothing. You make $174,000 a year and live like you make $500,000? Where's the money coming from? And how dare you lecture about inequality while living in luxury? AOC was flushed, defensive. I was making a statement about the concentration of wealth, she insisted. You were attending a party that working people can't afford. Vance's voice rose slightly. You wore a dress they can't afford, custom made by a designer who didn't pay her taxes or her workers. You socialized with people worth hundreds of millions. You posed for photos that screamed, I'm part of the elite now. And you called it activism, he scoffed. That's not a statement about inequality. That's participating in inequality while wearing a slogan for Instagram. Vance pulled out his own book, Hillbilly Elegy. I wrote this book about poverty, about the working class, about the struggles of Appalachia and Rust Belt America. It sold millions of copies. It helped people understand the working class. That's making a statement. Wearing a dress to a party isn't activism. It's performance. And everyone saw through it except your most devoted followers, he said, leaning forward. The Met Gala incident tells us everything we need to know about you. You're not fighting for the working class. You're not one of them. You're a member of the elite who uses working class aesthetics for branding. You're champagne socialism in a designer dress. You're everything wrong with performative progressivism. All style, no substance. All brand, no authenticity. Vance exposes the champagne socialist. Comment if you remember this hypocrisy. Vance pulled out what looked like a detailed economic impact study, pages dense with numbers and analysis. His expression was one of genuine bewilderment, mixed with frustration. Let's discuss one of your signature accomplishments, and I use that word, ironically, Amazon HQ. 2. In 2018, Amazon announced they'd build a second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, which is your district. Let's talk about what that would have meant, what you did, and what it cost, the people you claim to represent. He opened the study. Amazon HQ2, 25,000 to 40,000 jobs. Average salary, $150,000 per year. $3 billion in tax incentives over 10 years. Those are the facts. Now, let's do the math. And I know math isn't your strong suit despite the economics degree, but stay with me. Vance started calculating out loud, meticulously. 25,000 jobs times $150,000, average salary equals $3. $75 billion in annual wages. Over 10 years, that's $37.5 billion in wages that would have gone to people in New York, many in your district. Tax revenue from those incomes alone, approximately $4 billion over 10 years. Corporate taxes from Amazon, approximately $2 billion. Property taxes, sales taxes from employee spending, another $2 billion. We're at $8 billion in new tax revenue. He held up the incentive package document. New York agreed to give up $3 billion in tax incentives. That means the state wasn't giving Amazon $3 billion in cash. They were agreeing not to collect $3 billion in taxes that wouldn't exist without Amazon coming. Net revenue, $8 billion collected minus $3 billion not collected equals $5 billion in net new revenue. You saved $3 billion that was never real money in the first place and cost New York $5 billion in net revenue, he stated flatly. Vance then pulled out job descriptions. Let's talk about these jobs. You claimed they'd be corporate jobs that would gentrify the neighborhood. Let's look at what the jobs actually were. Software engineers, yes, but also administrators, facilities managers, food service workers, security personnel, maintenance staff, HR professionals. 25,000 jobs across all income levels. These aren't all billionaires, Congresswoman. These are working people, he showed survey data. After you killed the deal, polls showed 70% of Queens residents wanted Amazon. 70% of your own constituents wanted those jobs, but you opposed it anyway because it fit your anti-corporate narrative. You cost your constituents jobs they wanted because you needed a villain for your social media feed. Vance pulled out follow-up economic studies. Let's look at what happened after Amazon left. Projected property value increases in Long Island City didn't happen. Planned investments from businesses anticipating Amazon customers were canceled. Restaurant openings, retail expansion, service industry growth all dead. You didn't just kill 25,000 Amazon jobs, you killed the ecosystem of jobs those workers would have supported. He did more math. 25,000 workers, making $150,000, spend money. They eat at restaurants, they shop at stores, they use services. The economic multiplier effect means each of those jobs supports approximately 2 additional jobs in the service sector. That's 50,000 jobs total affected by your decision. 50,000 jobs, Congresswoman. Vance's voice was sharp now. I worked in venture capital before entering politics. I know how economic development works. You bring companies in, they create jobs. Those workers spend money. That spending creates more jobs. It's basic economics, the kind they should have taught you at BU, but you don't understand that tax incentives aren't cash, he said, shaking his head. You thought New York was writing a check for $3 billion. You celebrated saving money that didn't exist while costing your district billions in economic activity. He pulled out his own economic record. When I was in business, I invested in companies that created jobs in Ohio and Kentucky, in communities that needed them. I brought economic opportunity to places that had been left behind. You killed economic opportunity in a place that wanted it. That's the difference between understanding economics and performing for Instagram. AOC tried to defend herself. Those Amazon jobs would have displaced working-class residents through gentrification, those Amazon jobs would have employed working-class residents. Vance was genuinely angry now. $150,000 salaries for programmers, administrators, facilities workers. Those are good middle-class jobs. You're telling me people in Queens don't want to make $150,000? You're telling me those jobs would hurt them? That's the most elitist thing I've ever heard. You decided working people shouldn't have the opportunity to earn good wages because it didn't fit your narrative. Vance gathered the economic studies. You killed 25,000 direct jobs and 25,000 indirect jobs. You cost New York $5 billion in net tax revenue. You prevented massive economic development in a community that wanted it. And you celebrated like you'd won something. You hadn't won. Your constituents lost. They lost jobs, opportunity, and economic growth. But you won Twitter engagement, so I guess that's what matters to you. He looked at the camera. This is what happens when you elect someone who has credentials but no competence. Someone with an economics degree who doesn't understand economics. Someone who values social media performance over actual results. 50,000 jobs lost. $5 billion in revenue gone. All so she could be the hero who stood up to Amazon. That's not representation. That's sabotage. 3 rounds. AOC's record destroyed. Keep watching. It gets worse. Vance pulled out what looked like the actual Green New Deal resolution, all 14 pages of it, with handwritten notes in the margins and multiple colored tabs marking specific sections of concern. Let's discuss your signature legislative proposal, the Green New Deal, Vance said, placing it on the podium. I've read it multiple times. I've studied it. I've analyzed it, and I have to say, Congresswoman, it reads like a college freshman's wish list, written after binge-watching MSNBC and assuming money grows on trees. Let's talk about the math, which apparently wasn't covered thoroughly enough at Boston University, he quipped, opening to the first page. Your Green New Deal resolution, co-sponsored with Senator Markey, proposes to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions within 10 years. Admirable goal. Impossible execution. Let's go through the specific proposals and calculate what they'd actually cost and whether they're even physically possible. Vance flipped to his notes, citing cost estimates from multiple nonpartisan sources. The American Action Forum calculated the cost at $93 trillion over 10 years. The more conservative estimates put it at $51 trillion. Let's use the lower number to be charitable. $51 trillion over 10 years. He looked up. Current federal revenue is approximately $5 trillion per year, which is $45 trillion over 10 years. Your proposal costs more than all federal revenue combined. You're already $6 trillion short, and that's using the most conservative estimate and assuming we spend $0 on defense, Social Security, or Medicare. He read directly from the resolution text, quote, guaranteeing a job with a family-sustaining wage, adequate family and medical leave, paid vacations, and retirement security to all people of the United States. That's a federal jobs guarantee for everyone. 330 million people. Even if only half the population wants these guaranteed jobs, that's 165 million federal jobs. The entire current federal workforce is about 2 million. You're proposing to increase it by 80-fold. Vance flipped pages rapidly. Quote, providing all people of the United States with high-quality health care. That's Medicare for all, estimated at $32 trillion over 10 years. Quote, providing all people of the United States with access to clean water, clean air, healthy and affordable food, and nature. How do you propose to guarantee nature to all people? Is the federal government going to mail everyone a tree? He found another tabbed section. Here's my favorite. Guaranteeing economic security to all who are unable or unwilling to work. Unable or unwilling. You're proposing to pay people who choose not to work. You're guaranteeing economic security to people who are unwilling to contribute to society. That's not a social safety net. That's paying people to do nothing. Vance pulled out the infamous frequently asked questions document that her office had released and then retracted. You released a frequently asked questions to explain the Green New Deal. It was so embarrassing you deleted it from your website, but the internet is forever, Congresswoman. Let me read from it. We set a goal to get to net zero, rather than zero emissions, in 10 years, because we aren't sure that we'll be able to fully get rid of farting cows and airplanes that fast. You mentioned farting cows in an official policy document, he said, unable to suppress a smile. Farting cows. The audience chuckled. The frequently asked questions also said you wanted to build out high-speed rail at a scale where air travel stops becoming necessary. You wanted to replace airplanes with trains. How exactly do you take a train from New York to Hawaii? Or to Europe? Did you think we'd build trains across the Pacific Ocean? Vance pulled out engineering assessments. Let's talk physical possibility. Your plan calls for retrofitting or rebuilding every building in America within 10 years to maximize energy efficiency. There are approximately 136 million buildings in the United States. That's 13.6 million buildings per year. 37,000 buildings every single day for 10 years straight. Congresswoman, we don't have the construction workers, the materials, or the physical capacity to do that. It's engineering fiction. He showed energy grid studies. You want to eliminate fossil fuels within 10 years. Fossil fuels currently provide 60% of U.S. electricity. You're proposing to rebuild the entire energy grid, replace all fossil fuel plants with renewables, upgrade transmission infrastructure, and do it all in 10 years. The engineers who study this say it would take 30 to 40 years minimum, and that's with unlimited funding. You're proposing a timeline that defies physics. Vance pulled out the legislative record. Let's see how your own party received this brilliant proposal. Senate vote on the Green New Deal resolution. 0 Republicans voted yes. How many Democrats voted yes? Take a guess. 0. Not a single Democrat voted for it. When Republicans forced a vote to put everyone on the record, your own party wouldn't support it. Even Nancy Pelosi mocked it, calling it the Green Dream or whatever. He looked at AOC seriously. Every economist who's analyzed this says it's impossible to fund. Every engineer who studied it says it's impossible to build. Your own party wouldn't vote for it. But you made it your signature issue. You tied your brand to a proposal so unrealistic that even your allies abandoned it. What does that say about your judgment? AOC was shaking her head, visibly frustrated. We need bold solutions to address the existential threat of climate change, she argued. Bold doesn't mean impossible. Vance raised his voice, cutting through her slogan. Bold doesn't mean ignoring math, physics, and reality. I support environmental protection. I want my kids to inherit a healthy planet. I support investment in clean energy, in conservation, in responsible environmental policy. But your proposal isn't bold. It's delusional. It would cost more than we have, build more than we can, and guarantee things that can't be guaranteed. Vance gathered the documents. The Green New Deal is a fantasy. It's economically impossible, physically impossible, and politically toxic, which is why your own party abandoned it. But you made it your signature issue, which tells us everything about your approach to policy. You don't do serious analysis, you don't calculate costs, you don't consider feasibility. You propose things that sound good on Twitter without caring whether they could actually work. That's not leadership. That's performance art masquerading as policy. 4 rounds of destruction. Vance is methodical. Share this with everyone. Vance pulled out what appeared to be a comprehensive dossier, with photos, receipts, and documentation. This was personal now, exposing the gap between AOC's brand and her reality. Congresswoman, your entire political brand is built on being a working-class champion, a former bartender who fights for everyday people against the elite. Let's examine your actual lifestyle versus the image you project on social media. Spoiler alert, there's a gap. A big, expensive, hypocritical gap. He showed photos of her apartment building. You live at the Yards, a luxury apartment complex in Washington, D.C.'s Navy Yard neighborhood. Monthly rent for a studio starts at approximately $2,000, and yours is likely higher. Let's see what that buys you. Rooftop pool, fitness center, concierge service, package delivery, pet spa, resident lounge. These are the amenities at your building. Very nice. Very expensive. Very much not working class. Vance pulled out comparison data. The median rent in your district in Queens is approximately $1,800 for family housing. You pay more for your solo luxury apartment than your constituents pay to house their families. But you tweet about housing inequality from your rooftop pool. He showed photos from her own Instagram and public appearances. Let's analyze your wardrobe, since you've made it public, by posting it. Fashion industry analysts estimate you regularly wear clothing worth thousands of dollars. Custom-tailored suits, approximately $1,000 to $2,000 each. Designer accessories. Expensive eyeglasses. Professional styling. You're photographed at expensive D.C. restaurants regularly. You travel first class. It's in the public expense reports. Vance pulled out her old posts. You used to drive a Tesla, a $60,000 car, while representing one of the most working-class districts in New York. While attacking billionaires and capitalism, you drove a car that costs more than your constituents make in a year. When called out, you tried to delete the evidence, but again, the internet is forever. He showed a financial analysis. You make $174,000 per year. That's a good salary. But you live like you make $300,000. Where's the money coming from? Your apartment alone is $24,000 to $30,000 per year. Add in your wardrobe, your dining, your travel, your lifestyle. You're spending way more than you make. So either you have other income you're not disclosing, or you're living beyond your means while lecturing others about economic justice. Vance pulled out photos from the Met Gala again. We discussed this earlier, but let's reinforce the point. You attended a party where tickets cost $35,000, wearing a custom designer dress, socializing with billionaires and celebrities. This isn't working-class behavior. This is elite behavior. You're not fighting the elite. You've joined them. You're just wearing a tax-the-rich costume while doing it. He compared it to his own background. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. My mom was a drug addict. My biological father wasn't around. I lived with my grandparents in a small house in a declining town. We were poor. I slept on the couch. We struggled to pay bills. That's actual working-class poverty. Not. My dad was an architect in Westchester County, middle-class comfort. Vance showed his own modest lifestyle. I wrote a best-selling book. It made good money. I could afford luxury. Instead, I live modestly because I remember what it's like to have nothing. I remember what poverty actually feels like. You grew up in Westchester County, one of the wealthiest counties in America. Your dad was an architect. You went to Boston University. That's not poverty. That's middle-class privilege. He pulled out documentation. Your family owned a home in Yorktown Heights, Westchester County. Do you know what homes cost there? The median home price when you were growing up was over $400,000. Your high school, Yorktown High School, is rated one of the top schools in New York. This isn't working-class struggle. This is upper-middle-class suburban comfort. Vance's voice got harder. You've appropriated working-class identity for political benefit. You worked as a bartender for 8 years, honest work that I respect. But millions of people bartend and don't claim it makes them experts on working-class struggle. You use that bartending experience like it's a Purple Heart. You wave it around as proof you're one of the people. But your lifestyle, now, luxury apartment, designer clothes, elite social circles, that's not the working class. That's the elite. He looked directly at her. The difference between us is authenticity. I actually grew up poor, and I remember it. I live modestly despite success, because I know what poverty does to people. You grew up middle class, worked a working class job briefly, and now live like the elite while performing as working class for political points. You're not representing the working class. You're appropriating their identity while living a lifestyle they can't afford. AOC tried to respond. I worked as a bartender. I understand the struggles. You worked as a bartender 8 years ago. Vance cut her off. Now you live in a luxury building that costs more per month than most bartenders make. Now you wear designer outfits worth more than most bartenders make in a month. Now you socialize at events that cost what bartenders make in a year. You're not a bartender anymore. You're a member of the elite who uses bartending as a prop. Stop appropriating working-class identity while living in luxury. It's dishonest, and it's insulting to people who actually struggle. 5 rounds. AOC's image shattered. Keep watching the destruction. Vance pulled out a series of screenshots and photos that made the audience lean forward. This was about to get personal in a way that exposed not just hypocrisy, but something worse: exploitation of family for political gain. Let's talk about your grandmother in Puerto Rico. This is a story about priorities, about authenticity, and about whether you actually care about the people you claim to fight for, even when those people are your own family. He showed tweets from June 2021. You posted photos of your grandmother's home in Puerto Rico. The house showed water damage, a damaged roof, deteriorating conditions. You blamed this on the Trump administration's response to Hurricane Maria in 2017. You said, and I quote, "It's been 4 years. Trump failed Puerto Rico and stole billions in aid." You used your grandmother's suffering to make a political point. Vance showed the images. These photos were genuinely concerning. Your grandmother appeared to be living in difficult conditions. Any decent person seeing these would want to help, and that's exactly what happened. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh started a GoFundMe to raise money to repair your grandmother's house, not to mock you, to actually help. He pulled out the GoFundMe records. Within days, Americans donated over $100,000 to fix your grandmother's house. People from across the country, many of them conservatives who disagree with your politics, donated because they saw someone in need and wanted to help. That's the American spirit right there. Vance's expression hardened. And what did you do? You refused the money? You said it was in poor taste. You rejected $100,000 that could have fixed your grandmother's house. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You posted photos of your grandmother's damaged home to score political points against Trump. People offered to help. You refused the help because it came from the wrong people politically. He pulled out follow-up reporting. After you refused the donation, reporters investigated. They interviewed neighbors. They looked into the actual conditions. Questions emerged about whether the photos were representative, whether the situation was as dire as presented, whether this was more about performance than reality. Your grandmother's house wasn't as damaged as the selective photos suggested. You'd used the most dramatic angles to make a political point. Vance showed the timeline. Here's what bothers me most. After you refused the $100,000, what happened to your grandmother? Did you fix her house? Did you, a member of Congress making $174,000 a year, use your own money to help? Did you organize a fundraiser among your wealthy friends and supporters? Or did you just move on to the next viral tweet? He pulled out more documentation. There's no evidence you actually helped your grandmother. No evidence the house was repaired. No follow-up posts about fixing the problems you'd photographed. You used her suffering for a political attack, refused help when it was offered, and then abandoned the story once it stopped being politically useful. That's not family values. That's exploitation. Vance compared it to his own experience. In my book, I write about my grandmother, Mama. She raised me when my mom couldn't. She struggled financially. She made sacrifices, and when I became successful, I took care of her. That's what you do for family. You don't use them for photo ops and political attacks. You help them. He looked at AOC with genuine disgust. You make $174,000 a year. You could have easily paid to fix your grandmother's house. You could have accepted the $100,000 from donors who genuinely wanted to help. Instead, you used her suffering for political points, refused help because it came from conservatives, and never followed up on whether she got the help she needed. That tells me everything about your priorities. Political performance over family. Social media engagement over actually helping people, even your own grandmother. AOC was defensive now. That was a right-wing stunt to distract from Trump's failure in Puerto Rico. It was $100,000 to help your grandmother. Vance's voice rose. Real money from real people who wanted to help. You could have taken it, fixed her house, thanked the donors, and proven that Americans care about each other across political lines. Instead, you rejected it to maintain your political narrative. You chose politics over your grandmother's well-being. Vance gathered the evidence. This incident reveals who you really are. When your grandmother needed help, you used her for political attacks. When help was offered, you refused it for political reasons. When the story stopped being useful, you abandoned it. You don't actually care about helping people. You care about political performance. And if you'll exploit your own grandmother for political gain, what won't you exploit? 6 rounds of exposing hypocrisy. 2 more coming. Here is part 3 of the narrative script, concluding the debate with the final rounds on the Amazon HQ2 disaster and the defund the police movement, followed by Vance's closing statement. The Vance vs. AOC debate. The extended cut, part 3 of 3. Vance reached under the podium and pulled out a binder labeled Economic Impact. Amazon HQ2. The room went silent. This was the specific economic blunder that had defined AOC's early career, and Vance was about to dissect it with surgical precision. Let's talk about job creation, Vance began, opening the binder. Or rather, let's talk about job destruction. In 2019, Amazon planned to build a second headquarters in Long Island City, right near your district. It promised 25,000 jobs, high-paying jobs. The average salary was going to be $150,000 a year, plus construction jobs, plus the service industry boom that follows that kind of investment. He held up a graph showing the projected revenue. But you fought it. You led the charge to kill the deal. And you celebrated when Amazon pulled out. You claimed you were saving New York City $3 billion. You tweeted, "We could invest that $3 billion in our crumbling subways, our schools, our teachers." Vance lowered the paper and looked at her with pity. "Congresswoman, this exposes a fundamental lack of financial literacy. You thought the city was writing a check for $3 billion to Jeff Bezos. You thought there was a pile of cash sitting in a vault that we could just take and give to teachers instead." He leaned into the microphone. "That's not how tax incentives work. That $3 billion was a discount on the $27 billion in tax revenue. Amazon would have paid over time. The money didn't exist yet. You didn't save $3 billion. You cost the city $27 billion in lost revenue. You cost your constituents 25,000 jobs. and you got nothing in return. Amazon went to Virginia. Virginia got the jobs. Virginia got the tax revenue. New York got zero. The subways didn't get fixed. The schools didn't get funded because you chased away the money that would have paid for them. AOC interjected, "We shouldn't give handouts to billionaires." "It wasn't a handout," Vance snapped back, slapping the binder closed. "It was an investment. If I offer you a 10% discount to buy a car from my dealership and you walk away, I didn't save the discount money. I lost the sale. You treated the economy like a zero-sum game because you don't understand how wealth is created. You think wealth is something you confiscate. I know wealth is something you build. And because of your economic illiteracy, 25,000 families don't have paychecks today." Vance moved immediately to the final stack of papers. This was the darkest chapter. Let's talk about safety. Let's talk about defund the police. He pulled out a series of her tweets from 2020. While cities were burning, while businesses were being looted, you were cheering on the defund movement. You said, quote, "Defunding police means defunding police." You argued that cutting law enforcement budgets would somehow make communities safer. You claimed that people were only shoplifting because they were hungry, stealing bread to feed their families. I believe you said. Vance pulled out the NYPD crime statistics for her own district. Let's look at the results of your philosophy. Since the defund movement began, which you championed, shootings in New York City doubled. Murders went up nearly 40%. Transit crime spiked. And who suffers the most? Is it the rich people in their doorman buildings? No. It's the working-class minorities in the Bronx and Queens. The very people you claim to represent are the ones bleeding in the streets because you vilified the police who protect them. He pulled out a federal spending report. And here is the height of hypocrisy. While you were calling to defund the police for everyone else, you voted to increase funding for your own protection. You spent thousands of campaign dollars on private security. You have armed guards. The Capitol Police protect you. You live behind a wall of security that the taxpayers fund. Vance looked at the audience. This is the pattern. She wants you to give up your car, but she flies first class. She wants you to give up your gas stove, but she eats in luxury restaurants. She wants you to live without police protection, but she hires private security. It's rules for thee, but not for me. She is safe. Her constituents are not. That isn't justice, Congresswoman. That is aristocracy. Vance gathered the papers into a neat pile. The debate was effectively over. All that remained was the epitaph. He looked at AOC, not with anger anymore, but with a calm, decisive finality. "We have spent the last hour peeling back the layers of your political brand," Vance said quietly. "And what have we found underneath?" He counted off on his fingers. "We found a Green New Deal that is mathematically and physically impossible, written by someone who doesn't understand the energy grid. We found a working-class champion who lives in a luxury apartment, wears designer clothes, and attends the Met Gala with the very elites she claims to hate. We found a granddaughter who used her abuela's suffering for a photo op, then refused $100,000 in help because it came from the wrong political side. We found an economic theorist who chased 25,000 jobs out of her own city because she didn't understand how taxes work. And we found a politician who demands we defund the police for our families, while she hides behind armed guards for herself." Vance placed his hands on the podium. "You are not a revolutionary, Congresswoman. You are a product. You are a creation of social media algorithms designed to generate outrage and engagement, but completely incapable of governing. You offer slogans, not solutions. You offer performance, not policy. You are the perfect politician for the Instagram age. Pretty filters, catchy captions, and absolutely no substance." He picked up his notepad and turned to walk away, pausing for one final line. "America doesn't need influencers. America needs leaders." And until you learn the difference between a retweet and a result, you have no business holding that seat. Vance walked off the stage. The silence was deafening,